Hello, everyone. This is Mike Wallace, Managing Director at Brown Flynn, a corporate responsibility and sustainable governance consulting firm. We work in partnership with Nasdaq to do this ongoing educational webinar series that you're here a part of today. We've got over 125 plus registrants on, and we're going to wait a few minutes while people still log in. We're up to about 50 at this point, but we've just opened up the system, so that all of you on the call currently know you're all on mute. You'll remain on mute throughout the call, and we will record this call. What we will also be doing throughout the call is fielding questions from you, so please feel free to use the chat option or the question option, or if you choose to, you can write in directly through email to me. I'll field your question, but without any attribution. So, this is your chance to ask hard questions of our friends here from EcoVadis, Datamaran, and RepRisk. I'm going to give it just a couple of minutes. I'm just going to be quiet for a couple of minutes, and we'll come back in just a second. All right, everyone, this is Mike Wallace again from Brown Flynn. We're partnering with Nasdaq in this ongoing webinar series related to educating companies and other stakeholders on ESG-related issues and topics. We've been in partnership with Harvey at Nasdaq for over 2 years now on this series, and I'm going to give him a couple of minutes in a second or two to explain some of the background. First, I want to give you some of the background on the series as well as what we're going to be doing today. Today is around big data and corporate sustainability performance, how the world is using your data. And we have three very unique entities that are online with us today to share what they're doing, how they're doing it, and how they're taking your information, whether you know it or not, or like it or not, and turning it into useful information for other users. And so now is your chance to understand how much ESG data is out there, how it's being used, and also how you can fix it if it's not correct. So with that, I want to go to the next slide and explain a little bit more about this programming. We've been doing this for over 2 years now with the help of Nasdaq and Harvey and many others on his team. But you can see here what we're really trying to do is educate as much of the market on as broad a set of ESG topics as possible. So you can see here some of the topics we've covered over the last 2 years, as well as some of the significant stakeholders that have been involved in this conversation. If you're out there listening and tuning in today and you have some ideas for content going forward, we would be happy to take your ideas. We record all of these webinars, and we also then will send all these out to every registrant for this webinar. We then post it on our website at Brown Flynn, where you can download or share this with others. So there will be a PDF along with this webinar, as well as the actual audio recording, so this can be used for future purposes. So next slide gives us a little bit about today's webinar, and I'm going to pass it over to Evan to give us a little bit of an intro from Nasdaq about why they're doing this work, but also want to hear from Evan about some of the latest related to the stock exchange activity. Evan, are you there?
I'm here. Thank you, Michael. Happy to have everyone join us today. I'm coming to you from Austin, Texas, where we're speaking at the Smart Cities Connect conference. Big data is a part of the conversation here, certainly, as well as disruptive technology, ESG transparency. As Mike mentioned, we've been doing this webinar series for a number of years now, both a two-way conversation with issuers, companies, and exchanges around sustainability drivers, transparency, and performance. One of the questions that I hope we get to today is data transparency as a driver in and of itself, making data more prevalent in the marketplace so that investors and other stakeholders can make great decisions about companies, but also data as hopefully a performance driver. The more we become aware of what the ESG metrics say and where we are situated in terms of certain industries and performance metrics, how are we improving companies? How are we making them better and more and building them for the long term? Exchanges, if you don't know, use this data quite a bit. We have some exchanges that require ESG disclosure data, sustainability performance data in order to qualify to list on that market and have access to investors. Nasdaq is engaged and has been engaged for many years on a voluntary reporting program. In fact, earlier this year we just published an ESG reporting guide. Covers a lot of metrics across the ESG space that we think are significantly valuable, specifically for investors, but for a lot of different stakeholders. So I definitely look forward to the conversation today. We have a great deal of history with the speakers, especially Datamaran, who has enjoyed a long collaboration with Nasdaq. We have talked to them about the evolution of their product, and we have put their product in front of a lot of different issuers. And of course, EcoVadis, we have had a lot of experience with as well. So I'm looking forward to the discussion, and I'm here to answer questions as it comes regarding the exchanges, but this is hopefully just a platform for you and the speakers to talk about these issues, the big data issues related to ESG transparency in particular.
Great, thanks a lot, Evan, and I'll turn to you for some questions throughout the process, because we know not only are you, as you serve in your role as someone who's doing the reporting for NASDAQ and gathering up this type of data and putting it out into public domain, also as the exchange itself, you're looking at company information yourselves, and you're creating indices as well as just helping these entities govern themselves. So I'll turn back to you for some questions throughout the presentation. We're up to a good number of people involved in the webinar today. Our first panelist is going to be Pierre-Francois Fallier from EcoVadis, and I probably murdered your last name there, sorry. But I've known Pierre for a couple of years now, met them through their work that they were doing with the chemical industry. And the dynamic you want to pay attention to here is that this data collection and data gathering that's going on is not just about publicly traded companies. And so what EcoVadis is doing is all throughout the supply chain. So it entails public and private companies. So Pierre, I'm going to pass it over to you, and Julianne will drive at your preference.
Thank you, Mike, and thanks for inviting me, and thanks, Ivan, as well. So I'm really glad to be here today with my colleagues of RepRisk and Datamaran to share some light or help create a bit more transparency on what's happening in the ESG rating space, in particular when it comes to big data and leveraging more scalable approaches. So I'm Pierre Fallier, co-founder of EcoVadis, which I started 10 years ago, and I'm back in Europe after a couple of years in the States. So if you go to the next slide. So when we started EcoVadis just 10 years ago now, we were able to propagating is supply chain sustainability, or the very quickly fast increasing market for CSR in supply chain, where large organizations, large procurement organizations, on the left of the slide, are sending more and more requests to their suppliers in the form of audit request surveys on every market for specific ESG topics. And this is creating a very complex challenge for the procurement organizations, which often don't have the resources and capabilities on the right scale. But also, of course, for the companies which are being assessed, and many of you on this call are probably on the right side of this graph. So what EcoVadis is doing, and if you go on the next line, was to create global platform or collaborative platform to provide reliable ESG ratings or on performance, connecting procurement organizations and suppliers. And today we are operating this platform on behalf of 35,000 customers. So on the buy side, we work with now close to 200 companies in our clients, such as Unilever or Nestle or Salesforce or Huawei, which are interested to know and to understand what's happening in their supply chain. And on the supply side, 35,000 companies are now customers subscribing for platform across 120 countries, and most of those are SMEs. You of course have some very large, publicly listed companies which are suppliers to those brands, but the vast majority is consists of SMEs, which have been, previously outside the scope of ESG ratings and ESG, reporting requests. EcoVadis, we are 380 employees now, operating from tangible offices from San Francisco to Paris to Hong Kong, and we are growing more or less 40% per annum. As the demand for CSR information in supply chain is increasing quickly due to new regulations, due to demands of big brands which have a cascading effect on suppliers, in different in the lower tier of the supply chain. We also realize that even though we have a good coverage or a good lead in covering the ESG space and CSR and CSR information for supply chain, we need to accelerate what we do. And so we just completed a couple of months ago a funding round of $30 million to invest in next generation of our platform, which will allow us to leverage more automation and big data technologies to be able to scale this even further.
Hey, Pierre, this is Mike. You're a little bit garbled. Are you able to make the connection or get a little closer to the phone, possibly?
I can.
That's much better right there. Yeah. No, now it's garbled again. I'm not sure. You must be on a cell phone, possibly.
If you just want to, okay, give me 2 minutes. I will call from a fixed line if I can. Sorry for that.
You sound okay right now.
You want to take some questions or make some comments while I'm trying to connect?
All right. So I'll give a little commentary on this. The reason that we're doing the webinar today, as well as the reason for these three different players. From our point of view, Brown Flynn as a consultancy, we deal with lots of survey fatigue out there. The ESG ratings and rankings world permeates the sustainability field, as you all well know. And so part of our work with Nasdaq is to clarify some of that dynamic that exists in the marketplace. So many of you probably are hearing about things like GRI and SASB and integrated reporting and the IIRC, and you're probably hearing about the Sustainable Development Goals. You're also probably seeing and hearing about lots of top lists, like this company made the most ethical corporation, or this company made most admired. People make the Dow Jones Sustainability Index, and as of this Friday, everybody is racing to get their CDP and their Dow Jones Sustainability surveys into the systems, if you will. This crazy kind of survey fatigue that goes on not only is happening with public companies, but now as companies realize that they're being graded and scored on their own footprint, they're also realizing that they're being graded and scored on how they manage the supply chain. And so that's creating this unique ripple effect. In some cases, companies are creating their own questionnaires and sending it out to 500 or 1,000, or in some cases even 10,000 suppliers. It creates a lot of survey fatigue. In other cases, you have cloud-based systems like EcoVadis. So that's partly why we brought Pierre on today to explain what they're doing and how they're doing it and the number of companies that are leveraging this approach. We'll then turn to Datamaran, who's doing some really unique work in this space of gathering data through automated artificial intelligence, machine language type learning, and Susie will do a much better job explaining that to us all. But imagine of all of the ESG data that's out there on your website, in a brochure, in a 10K, or another financial filing, or in regulatory databases. Imagine if you could create a system that would go out there and just grab all that data and bring it together. And that's what you're going to hear about from Datamaran. And third, we're going to bring up RepRisk. Pierre? Excellent. Yeah. Well, let me just finish up. And the third, we'll hear from RepRisk. who's been at this type of work for almost, I think, maybe 20 years. But they come at this very much from a reputational point of view, hence the name RepRisk. And the way that they are looking at the world is public and private companies again, and looking for any of those major issues that might be out there on your horizon, or that might be hitting a certain region or a company or issues within a supply chain. And Alex will do a very good job at unveiling a little bit more about what they're doing. So Pierre, thanks for dialing back in. Back over to you.
Okay, and I hope the line will be better, and sorry for the interruption.
Yeah,
so
better,
yeah, indeed, as Mike was saying, we're trying to achieve two things. One is avoiding duplication of effort, so allowing those 35,000 companies already to have only one request and share with potentially 150 or 200 of their customers. And second, and maybe that's the most important one, drive more improvements or drive more change. The reason those big brands decide to collaborate on a common platform is they realize that if they want to push for environmental, social, human rights improvements, they'd better join forces. If we go on the next slide. Yes, and we do this through a combination of process for onboarding and supporting and providing feedback to suppliers, expertise, so combining information technology, software, big data analytics, and CSR experts. We have 150 experts today developing our platform, and of course a cloud-based platform to connect all these 35,000 companies worldwide. If we go on the next slide, yes, I wanted to share with you a view of what was different, or what were the differences we were seeing between the space you're familiar in, which is investor ESG ratings, and this new space of supply chain ESG ratings. So the way we see it is, it's actually quite different. Even though the methodology, even though the topics we look at are very similar, the universe is very, very different. The investors ESG rating are focusing on the 5,000 large caps. The universe for supply chain ESG ratings is potentially the 1 million companies which are involved in B2B supply chain. The type of data you need to analyze is also different. For large caps or large multinational companies, it's often publicly disclosed information, sustainability reports, 10Ks, and so on. For supply chain, most of the data is internal to companies. Previously it was not accessible. It's internal reports, internal, EHS policies, and so on. So we need to be able to capture, collect, and analyze this information, which is, for most of it, not publicly available. Another difference is end users. So in the ESG ratings world, most of the time, end users will be experts. So they are able to understand sophisticated reports. In our case, end users are business people. They are procurement guys on the buy side. They are sales directors or managing directors of SMEs. So we need to make those those ESG ratings very easy to understand. And last one, and maybe most important to me, in the investor ESG rating, the engagement piece, the way investors are really engaging with companies, right, to push them to improve, is variable. In the supply chain space, there is a very high level of engagement and focus on supplier improvements. One of the metrics we track is percentage of suppliers which are improving their score year over year, and it's in average 72%. For some customers, it's higher than that. So corporates, are really required in a way to push their suppliers to improve, because it's very costly for them to change suppliers, much more costly than changing allocation of a stock portfolio. So, and then to conclude, I wanted to share some examples. One of the questions of Mike was, how are those ratings used in the real world? So you have examples of programs here for 3 different companies, and we see companies using those ESG ratings in very different ways. For Coca-Cola, it's for their top suppliers, and they are monitoring year over year improvements of the ESG performance of their top 200 to 250 suppliers. For Nokia, which is a large global telco company or telco network equipment company, the focus was ensuring that their top 2,000 preferred vendors worldwide were reaching a minimum level of requirements. And it took them 3 years to reach this, hard work with a lot of suppliers in China, but they were able to get, like 80% of their suppliers reaching, minimum acceptable ESG performance. And for Société Générale, which is a big, large European or global bank, it's another way. They're using this part of the tendering process. So they're saying every time they go for tender, ESG performance of vendors will account for 5 to 10% in the business award decision. And that's driving, as you imagine, lots of improvements or very positive pressure on companies. So for all these reasons, we think that ESG rating for supply chain are an important part of this ESG space. And glad to continue the discussion with Susanne and the rest of the team.
Thanks, Pierre. Before we move on to Susanne, we have a couple of questions coming in, but also I want to give a real life experience with Evan, who works in Nasdaq not only as the spokesperson for these types of issues, but he's fielding questionnaires. Evan, are you getting questionnaires sent to you by your big customers, and what's that dynamic look like, and how are you reacting to it?
We are. You might think Nasdaq not really a heavy manufacturing footprint, but we pitch business. Nasdaq is mostly a technology company. We run exchanges, but most of the exchanges around the world are built on Nasdaq technology. So we are a technology vendor around the world, and we are fairly consistently, I would say constantly, but fairly consistently getting requests inbounds from EcoVadis and for potential sales and for RFPs and for bids. And we often have to answer questions particular to those pieces of business. It seems to be more prevalent in Europe, but it's happening everywhere. And we've definitely made the decision to try to centralize, become more efficient by filling out the EcoVadis survey ourselves so that we have a standard response. We don't have to handle these questionnaires on an ad hoc basis as they come in, but basically work to provide a central database of answers that all of the different parts of the business can use. And that's what we're encouraging our listed companies to do too, because there's so many inbound requests and it's so much overlapping and complementary information. The more you can find efficiency through a partner or a reputable firm like EcoVadis, the better off you'll be in terms of using your time wisely.
Thanks, Evan. Another question that's come in, Pierre, is related to the most efficient way to develop your own questions. EcoVadis is doing what they're doing based on its own platform and the knowledge you guys have created. But let's say I'm in a unique industry or unique country or company, or have certain issues that are very sensitive to me. Am I able to work with you to program new questions?
Yes. So the way it works with us is we have developed materiality analysis for 150 sectors, and every time we work in a new industry sector, we will identify what are the specific material ESG risks to this sector, what are the specific certifications, audit protocols, labels which exist, and indeed we can then customize not only a questionnaire, because the questionnaire is really not the most important part, but then a scoring process which will be relevant for a particular profile of companies. And whether you work with EcoVadis or you decide to do it on your own, I think that's the right approach. Not have a one-size-fits-all, but recognize that you want to understand the performance of a company, the performance of a supplier, and for this you have to focus on what are material issues and specific certifications or specific best practices which can exist in this industry.
Great. Thanks, Pierre. So for the sake of time, we're 25 past the hour. I want to turn it over to Susie Katus at Datamaran. And Susie, it's up to you. You can take it away and explain what you guys are doing over there.
Great. Thanks so much, Mike. Just to check, are you able to hear me okay?
Yeah, very clear. Thanks.
Fantastic. Great. Well, thanks so much, Mike, Flynn, and Evan at Nasdaq for welcoming me to be part of this conversation, also to fellow panelists at EcoVadis and at RepRisk. You know, as Evan had said, we really appreciate the support of Brown, Flynn, and Nasdaq, who were part of the conversation around Datamaran over 3 years ago, when it really was just an idea. And the idea was really, in part, to get over that fatigue and, you know, start using smart technologies to process a lot more information. So we as humans can sleep, we can eat, we can take those breaks, but we can also have more credible information that can help us make better strategic decisions. And that's really, you know, where we are now, 3 years later, as a company. We have a platform, Datamaran, that's being used by companies in over 15 countries globally. And the platform itself is leveraging artificial technology as well as big data analytics to provide evidence-based insights for corporate decision makers, investors, consultants, who really want to build the business case and make a compelling business case for why non-financial issues matter and why there are risks and opportunities tied to them. So I'm not going to speak too much about why non-financial issues matter. I think I'm preaching to the choir on this webinar, but really talk a little bit more about how we can leverage smart technology to understand how non-financial issues are impacting businesses in the market and how we can use data to build compelling business cases. Next slide, please. So to your point of survey fatigue, Mike, you know, I think there are demands coming from standard setters, frameworks, and I worked with Global Reporting Initiative prior to joining EcoVadis and Datamaran. We see investors demanding this information, but here what we can see on the slide is that, you know, these issues are not just a so-called nice to have, they really are a must-have. The regulatory demands for disclosure on non-financial issues are exponentially increasing. And what you see here, it just reinforces and illustrates the complexity of those demands. So what we found, because we track the regulatory landscape, we look at any sort of regulatory initiative, soft norms, and hard law that impact corporate transparency on these issues, is that there are now 17 times more non-financial disclosure requirements than there were just 4 years ago. And the majority of these requirements are mandatory. They have real consequences tied to them. But what we're also seeing is that the so-called voluntary standards and frameworks, things like the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals and GRI, really are indicators and signals of what's to come from a mandatory perspective. So for all of the companies out there that are already voluntarily reporting on these issues, you're really ahead of the game. Because as one of the general counsels with which we work says, you know, if you're already doing the so-called voluntary disclosure, that when these issues become mandatory, that shift will be relatively painless. Next slide, please. So a key challenge here is that a lot of this information, especially when it comes to non-financial issues, is what we call unstructured data. It's narrative information. You can't necessarily quantify your impacts around cybersecurity, workforce diversity, and inclusion. So what we're seeing is that there is exponential amounts of unstructured data as well within different forms. And it's complex to keep track of this information. We see that this data around non-financial issues is within corporate reports, within regulation, within digital media, within all those different stakeholder surveys. So how can we actually derive meaning from all of that super valuable information that's seemingly trapped within these different sources? And that's a question that our CEO and co-founder, Mariela Alma, positioned over 4 years ago, when she was saying, how can we use smart technology to actually make this information more meaningful and valuable for decision makers? Next slide, please. So this is where big data and artificial intelligence can help us. And this is exactly what we're doing at EcoVadis. So data really are just the ingredients. And then once you combine that with technology and human expertise, what you're able to do is take that data and really evolve that into new ideas. There are different things that we can do with data, from discovering new things about things that you already know or discovering new things completely. But really, when you converge information, unstructured data with smarter technology and human expertise, what you're able to do is start to make more compelling business cases for why these issues matter and which issues actually matter. And what we're doing at EcoVadis is we're taking human expertise internally but externally, from data scientists to legal experts, financial experts, ESG, corporate transparency, risk management, and we're really using the machine to automate that really tedious process of trying to gather this information. Next slide, please. So then it becomes a question not of what information actually matters, but how do we use this information in more meaningful and intelligent ways? So ultimately, it's about having an augmented ability to perceive and understand our increasingly complex world, a world that, for the most part, we can't, as a human, comprehend, especially when it comes to non-financial risks and opportunities. But we still need to make decisions. And we can not only do this with our own brain power, but we really need augmented intelligence. Thanks for moving on to the next slide. So if we look at this landscape, the increasingly complex landscape, this is just a sample of the type of information that we are tracking through Datamaran. You can see that there are a lot of external influencers who are shaping the risks and opportunities tied to non-financial issues, things like cybersecurity, things like workforce diversity and inclusion, modern slavery, climate change, and digitalization. And what we're able to do when we apply augmented intelligence technology is we're able to track how these issues are being referenced in these different sources, which can then be used as a proxy for different stakeholder opinions. So just imagine, you can actually sit down, log in, and upload an entire ecosystem into your mind, so you can make better strategic decisions with the rest of your cognitive processing power, with the rest of what's available in your headspace. And how is this being applied in practice? Next slide, please. So here's an example of how this information is being applied in reality. What we see is that this information is supporting materiality assessment, the process of actually identifying what are the issues on which we as a company should be focusing because they present a risk or opportunity to us now, but also in the future. So as a client of Datamaran, you can access our platform, but we can also support you with applying these insights into a practice like a materiality assessment. And here's an example of how BBVA did that in their latest integrated report, where they used Datamaran to consolidate the opinions of stakeholders. So they used Datamaran to look at what are the issues that NGOs are referencing, regulators, social media, the news, companies, because what you're able to do with Datamaran is look at how over 7,000 different companies are addressing these issues in their corporate filings, including sustainability reports, financial reports, as well as their regulatory filings. You can see how these issues are being regulated by over 3,000 different regulators or regulatory initiatives worldwide. And you can also see how these issues are being addressed in the media. So this is just one use case. Next slide, please. Fortunately, data can be applicable to different types of use cases, and that's what we're seeing with Datamaran. We're working with companies, financial institutions, and consultants like Flynn who are leveraging Datamaran's evidence-based approach for benchmarking, for materiality, for risk management. And that's an interesting trend that we're seeing, is the integration of sustainability and traditional enterprise risk management. We also see on the capital market side that individuals are using this to assess companies, themes, and trends to identify potential risks and opportunities. And these are just some of the user types with which we work inside companies. Anyone who really is tasked with making decisions about why these issues matter and the potential impact that they may have on companies. Next slide, please. So to sum up, what are some of the benefits that we see when it comes to taking a data-driven or evidence-based approach? Well, of course, there's the time efficiency play. So having the speed and scale that computers can provide in order to process information much faster. But of course, you still need the humans to think strategically about that information. It's also about having the evidence to build a compelling business case and make well-informed decisions. It's also about having actionable insights that can be integrated into business strategy across departments, but also can be used in your engagements with a variety of different types of stakeholders. And these are just some of the examples that we see with the companies that we're working with in terms of how they've been applying the data captured via Datamaran into their everyday business processes. So I will jump into questions if we have time for questions now. On the next slide, we also have a variety of sources that are available to just kind of talk about the additional ways in which you can leverage data and some of the insights that we're capturing, but happy to answer any questions now.
Thanks, Susie. That was great. Very timely in the sense of what's going on in the marketplace, but also very conscientious of our timing window. So we're at 37 minutes past the hour. We've got about 23 minutes left. We do have a couple of questions that are coming in, and please feel free to write in through the question feature or the chat box. The question feature you'll see on your dashboard. Materiality has come up in Pierre's presentation as well as your presentation, Susie, and want to clarify that we don't have a bunch of experts on the phone. Some of the people that are calling in are new to this. They've heard the phrases corporate responsibility, sustainability, ESG. Could you explain materiality a little bit more in the space of sustainability field?
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, there's a slide where I actually had a quote there saying, you know, whether or not an issue is so-called financial or non-financial, and whether or not it's material or whether or not it impacts your business in the short, medium, or long term. Really, materiality in the sustainability world is looking at a new set of issues and trying to understand, you know, do these have an impact on our business? Do these have an impact on our value chain? And you know, how will they actually impact our business and the value chain with which we work? So when you're, as a company, trying to determine what issues are material, meaning which issues will actually have that type of impact and will influence stakeholder decision making, it can be complex because these issues tend to be, as I mentioned earlier, you know, they're not very quantifiable. So when you're going through the process of trying to identify which issues matter, you really have to take into consideration a variety of stakeholder opinions. So a starting point is typically to, one, look at your business values, see what are your goals and objectives as a business, but then also look at what are the issues on which my competitors and my peers and my industry are focusing, what are the issues that I'm required from a regulatory standpoint to be thinking about, what are the issues that the public out there in the news and media may be thinking about in relation to our industry and company. And then it's a process of, you know, prioritizing. Are those issues actually relevant? Because I think, you know, internally, if you're the one internally at a company making decisions about your company, you're the expert. So you are the one to think about how those issues, which issues actually may take a priority now, but also in the future. And that it requires engaging with a variety of stakeholders across the company. So I think it's important to also think about who is at the table inside of the company thinking about these issues. Is it just the sustainability team? Or do you have the CFO? Do you have the general counsel? Do you have the risk team at that table thinking about these issues? Because a lot of these issues cut across different disciplines and they are relevant to different departments. And then the last piece is communicating, sharing that information with your stakeholders so they too can make decisions about your company.
Excellent. Thanks, Susie. I'm going to ask something of Evan because I know he's going through this right now. But Evan, you're involved with the GRI directly. You're involved with the Global Sustainable Standards Board. You're looking at material within Nasdaq itself. What kind of advice would you give to companies that are listening in about materiality within the realm of sustainability? How do you get started?
Well, there's a couple of angles. One is we encourage companies to undertake materiality analysis so they have an understanding of the issues that are directly impactful for their business. So whether that is a financial materiality threshold or a different materiality threshold, take a hard look at the issues and see how they impact your business, creating value over the long term. And that could be internal measurement or external indicators of success. I think it's an essential first step for companies to start to identify which ESG metrics are really important to report on. Some of these metrics that we're talking about, and we deal with a lot of them at Nasdaq, and through my work at the GSSB and GRI, there's hundreds of metrics that are potentially interesting and informative in some ways to different stakeholders, but companies have to limit the universe to the things that make the most sense for them and that have a direct and insightful relationship to the operation of their business. So we encourage them to undertake a materiality analysis, to look at the issues that are important, to engage with a partner. You know, Nasdaq has very proudly used Brown Flynn for this purpose, because they bring a ton of expertise to the process of what a materiality analysis is and how we identify issues, and interviewing different people so that issues that we may not be aware of are brought to our attention. But companies can do this pretty quickly and pretty inexpensively if they get started. Don't start with a checklist of metrics and think that you have to fill the sheet from top to bottom. Start with an understanding of your business and fill in the metrics that make the most sense.
Great. Thanks, Evan. And I've got a couple of questions that come in, but I think I can wait on these because of the type of question, because it relates to data accuracy. And I think if we go to Alex next, because of the amount of data they're covering too, we can bring this question up at the very end. So Alex, to give you enough time, I'm going to pass the baton to you and have you explain what RepRisk is up to.
Great. Thanks very much to Brown Flynn and to Nasdaq for the opportunity to speak today. So we can go to the next slide or a couple of slides down. I'll get started in the interest of time. So who is RepRisk and how can we help? So we're a research and business intelligence provider, and within the landscape of ESG information out there, what we specialize in is in the risk side of ESG. So everything that we do is through this lens of risk. And we started off almost 20 years ago, as Mike said, as a consultancy focused on these issues, and we launched the database that we run today about 10 years ago, and it actually started as a consulting project for UBS. They asked us to prepare a list of about 100 companies they should be careful of doing business with, and for that assignment, we created a systematic framework to identify and assess and quantify companies' risk exposure. So we delivered this list to UBS, and then we realized this is a really interesting data set that could perhaps be useful to other organizations. So we launched a database that we've continued to build over the last 10 years, which I'll talk about over the next couple of slides. Next slide. And for us, ESG is not just about CSR, it's really about responsible business conduct, and we've just talked about materiality, these have material impacts on a company from a compliance perspective, from a reputational perspective, and from a financial perspective. Next slide. So what we do is we harness the power of big data, right? This is the theme of the day today, to help companies reduce blind spots and shed light on risks that come from an ESG perspective. So we help our clients manage and mitigate reputational, compliance, and financial risks because we help provide them information on ESG. Next slide. So basically what we try to do is push that information boundary. So companies are expected to act responsibly on ESG issues. And if you know something, it's easy to take a decision and act, but if you don't know something, it's difficult to do anything. So our work is to provide transparency and push that information boundary out so that you can have more information to take decisions. Great, so what do we do and how do we do it? So essentially, I mean, RepRisk is a due diligence tool, right? With this focus on risk, that's essentially how we started off, and that's how most of our clients use our data today. So in the landscape that I mentioned before of all this ESG information out there, our exclusive focus is on risk. And what we do is we screen big data from sources and stakeholders external to the company. So we actually don't look at any information that a company itself is providing. We won't look at your policies, we won't look at your processes, we don't look at your certifications, we will not ask you for a survey, and we don't do any company engagement. Our focus is only outside of the company. And why is that? So our approach has shown us over the last decade, more than a decade, that this type of information can really be a good reality check as to what's happening on the ground. So a company, for example, may have a human rights policy, but what is the media, the local newspapers, the NGOs, the local regulators, what are they reporting about what's happening on the ground for that company? How is that company conducting its business? So basically, the RepRisk view of the world is not the whole picture of a company, but it's one important aspect. Next slide. So how do we do this work? So our work starts by a daily screening of over 80,000 sources in 15 languages. So the different data sources are on the slide, from the large international media to local media to social media, governments, NGOs, regulators, think tanks, etc. And the picture on the slide is a funnel, because our work is to basically cast a very broad net, capture all the relevant information, curate it, analyze it, quantify it for our clients. And basically the criteria about what gets into RepRisk and what doesn't, the criteria is actually very simple. If it's linked to ESG, so we have a whole scope that defines what ESG is, linked to the international standards. If it's ESG related, if it's a risk, and if it's linked to a company or a project, we then capture it and it goes into RepRisk. It's a very rules-based and systematic approach to basically capture adverse data. And we do that through a variety of artificial intelligence and human intelligence. I think Susanne talked about that, how Datamaran is using that, and we take a similar approach in the sense that, you know, we leverage the technology that's available. So there's a lot of work that we do with our IT tool. We're looking at 500,000 pieces of news every single day in our IT tool, which is filtering and screening and doing relevancy checks and so on. And then the results are filtered down and passed to our analyst team. We have a large analyst team that speaks all the languages that we cover, those 15 languages, and they're the ones doing then the human touch, doing the analysis, scoring, linking, and the quality assurance. And this curation and the human part of it is very important, so that we make sure that everything that goes into the database, into the platform that our clients use, is something that's relevant for them. Great. So when we talk about due diligence, I mean, we run the largest due diligence database on ESG and business conduct risks. We have a global scope. We cover everything from developed to emerging to frontier markets. We focus on all sectors. And with respect to the companies that we have in the database, we now cover over 90,000 public, private, state-owned companies from around the world, as well as 20,000 projects. So things like factories, plantations, mines, dams, and so on. And our database is updated on a daily basis, so these figures grow as new companies are exposed. Next slide. And I think we talked a lot about companies and project exposure, but we have a variety of different data sets that are available. So you can also look at country risk, sector risk. You can look at the different ESG issues and hot topics, everything from Arctic drilling to indigenous people to human rights to corruption and so on. So there's a lot of data available to work with, and all taken from the systematic rules-based approach with a 10-year data history. Next slide. What you'll find in RepRisk is a variety of information. You'll have metrics that help you score and track and benchmark companies. We have also a variety of analytics that help you understand the risk profile of that company or of a project and the related relationships. We have a variety of qualitative research, so all the news that goes through our system and all of our analysis that we then deliver to you, and then you can use that to make your decisions based upon your internal policies and risk appetite. And then there's a variety of monitoring features, ways that you can monitor your clients, your suppliers, your investments on a daily basis using our tools. Next slide. So yeah, so we have a variety of ways to access the data, whether you want a report or a benchmarking brief, or whether you want to use an online platform. Our platform is our flagship product. It's basically an online searchable due diligence database. And then we have clients that go for full integration who are then integrating our quantitative solution into their internal risk management system or their supplier system or their investment tools. So I can give you a couple of examples now before we wrap it up. how do our clients put our data to use. So here on this slide, we just talk about the different categories of clients that we work with. We started off in the due diligence sector for banks, and we worked with banks and insurances the first couple years, and soon after that, we started working with asset managers and asset owners. Many of you may be familiar with RepRisk because we work with the Dow Jones Sustainability Index, we work with the CDP, we work with FTSE for Good. They're all using our data as part of their analysis for their indices. And more recently, we've worked with supply chain managers and compliance managers within multinationals, again, to look at risk from their perspective. But I think without going into too much detail on any of these, fundamentally, I think what we say on the next slide, whatever client we work the other direction, whichever client we work with, and we work with a variety of clients here that we listed on the slide. On the next slide, we basically try to sum it up by saying that regardless of the client or the organization that we work with, all of our clients use RepRisk in the same way. So we're a due diligence tool. We provide information on ESG risks, and basically our clients are using that data to screen, to flag, to assess, and then to monitor the risks linked to their own clients, suppliers, etc. So if it's a bank, that bank is then using it to look at their clients. If it's a multinational, they're checking the risks for their suppliers. If it's an investment manager or a pension fund, they're checking the risks in their investments. And if I have another couple minutes, then I can maybe even give a couple concrete examples on the next couple slides. So if we look at the banks that we work with 40, one back please, with 40 global banks, including in the US, Citibank and JP Morgan and Wells Fargo. So they're using us to look at their clients and their business transactions and basically using it as part of their risk management and compliance processes. So they're using it to basically check the risks that may then have a reputational, compliance, or financial impact on the bank. And on the next slide, for investment management, it's the same idea, right? And you can do this from any perspective. You can classify your risk and map a portfolio of risk. You can look at in-depth company research when you want to invest in a new company, and you can also screen a portfolio and monitor it for potential breaches of international standards and internal policies. And the last slide, I'm rushing a little bit at the end in light of the time. I want to make sure we have time for questions. From a supply chain perspective, it's the same idea. So Pierre-Francois talked a lot about company questionnaires, supplier questionnaires, and engagement. Where RepRisk can fit in is a couple levels up in the sense that, again, we're good at screening and monitoring large data sets for risk. So we can look at all suppliers and do a first classification and flagging, and then help you identify where in your supplier base do you have pockets of risk, to make sure that you're then deploying your resources efficiently when you do engage with your suppliers. So you want to make sure that you're engaging with the ones that matter the most. So let me stop there and leave it at that. We can skip this slide. I wanted to talk about some of the sort of special aspects of RepRisk, but let's stop there, and the rest of the slides can be sent around as part of the deck. Thanks very much, everyone.
And thanks, Alex. We've got other webinars on our website with greater detail about RepRisk and EcoVadis, as well as Datamaran, other webinars we've done, and I'm sure everybody that's on presenting has other materials they can get to you, so feel free to reach out to any of the panelists today. So with 5 minutes remaining, I want to recap on a couple of things. First of all, this type of activity is hitting everyone, public and private companies, and so this is not just about publicly traded companies and shareholder activism. This is up and down the value chain, up and down the supply chain, and so be aware that these tools are out there for you to use and access. From our standpoint as a consultancy, we do this type of due diligence on a daily basis with corporate clients to help them understand that these types of things are going on, and to help them also understand how to clean up this information if there's mistakes out there. And that was one of the big questions that came through that I want to run past all of you. And I'll start with Pierre, and then go to Susie, and then go to Alex, and use this last couple of minutes to wrap up. This is amazing what you all are doing. You're covering a tremendous amount of territory. but it's a lot of data, and there's probably a lot of room for error. What is the quality control kind of issues out there, and how do you manage those? And what should the corporate listeners be thinking about as they disclose this information? I know it's kind of a big question, but Pierre, give us a bit about the quality control aspects at EcoVadis.
To make it short, I think you have two issues. You have the quality of our own process and the quality of our own ratings, and you have the quality of the underlying or the raw data from companies. On own ratings, we have quality metrics where we track that we have less than 1% of errors, and that's something we can manage. Where there are huge uncertainties and huge gaps is on the quality of data which is reported by companies. In our space, SMEs, the quality of data for energy consumption, greenhouse gas emissions and so on is generally very low. Most of those are not verified by independent auditors, and so I think there is huge progress to be made on the quality of data, available from companies.
Great, thanks, Pierre. Susie, over to you.
Great, thanks. I think on the data quality side, what we see, because what we're looking at when we analyze corporate reporting, for instance, we're really looking at the level of emphasis being placed on a particular issue. So we can see whether or not a company is placing more or less disclosure on a particular issue, which can very much be used as a proxy for governance. What are the priorities for a company? And I think it's an interesting way of looking at this data because you're not simplifying the information into specific numbers, which don't necessarily capture the complexity of decision-making that goes into thinking about these issues at a company, for instance. But that's really also, I mentioned this earlier, it's a matter of thinking about who trains your data and having different expertise from the data world, from the ESG world, from finance, from risk. It's important to have those minds thinking about it. So, we're really fortunate to have had individuals like Flynn who are using our platform, industry experts who also help with the evolution of our methodology and approach, and really the human consumers at the end of it who are applying it to their day-to-day processes. So I think when you start to go beyond the numbers and really start to look at that more qualitative narrative information, you can see some interesting patterns that we may not have recognized before. Unfortunately, machines can help us see patterns across larger data sets a little bit more quickly than we can.
Excellent. Thanks, Susie. Alex, over to you. You're covering a lot of ground, a lot of territory, a lot of data points. What do you guys do in the way of quality control? And you can't be perfect, right?
Yeah, no, you try to be robust, but of course, no system is 100% perfect. But I think with respect to our own processes, as I mentioned a little bit in the presentation, we have a very systematic and rules-based approach. So our analysts have, I think it's 160 pages in the meantime, manual that defines every single step and rule in the process. So there is no judgment call on behalf of the analyst. They must follow that rule to ensure the quality and the integrity of the data over time. That's the sort of human element. The whole technology, artificial intelligence element is of course driven by rules as well, and there's learning involved there and machine learning that helps give us feedback as part of that. And then our algorithm, the scores that we give companies, is also, again, a very rules-based approach with a 10-year track record. So that's with respect to our own policies. But I think with respect to the sources that we cover, so the fact that we look at everything from a local newspaper and a local NGO all the way to the Financial Times and New York Times, what we try to do there is categorize our sources. So if a particular risk is published in a small local NGO or in Mike's blog, I don't know if you have a blog, Mike, it'll have a lower impact on a company's score than if that same risk exposure appears in the New York Times. So we try to categorize in a way where the more credible, the higher readership a source has, the higher the impact on the particular company would be. That's the way we approach it.
All right, we're at the hour. We had great attendance today. I wanted to pass it back to Evan to close things out. And also, if you want to ask any questions, Evan, please feel free. Again, this is recording. We'll distribute to everyone who registered for the webinar. Evan, over to you to close us out.
Yeah, not much to say. Just a couple of quick points based on this conversation. I think Alex made a great point towards the end that ultimately all of this data, all of this technology, all these tasks are intended to create more responsible companies, more companies that are better built for the future and to sustain themselves over the long term. I think that we are thinking of this now in some cases as a nice to have or as a bolt-on for existing business, and I think that this is the new normal. I think this is the way companies are being run today and will be run in the future, leveraging tools like the ones we heard about on this call. This is all about creating a company that treats its people and treats its communities and treats its products with care and with respect and with an understanding that some things are not infinite. And Nasdaq is in this because we're trying to drive capital into more sustainable directions. We're trying to move money into the places in the world and the places in the economic world where it is most needed. So thanks for giving me the opportunity to be the big picture guy at the end. I'll turn everybody loose here so we can go read Mike's blog.
Thanks a lot, Evan. All right, we will close out the recording and we'll get that out to all of you who registered, and we look forward to being in touch. Take care, and thanks to our panelists today for a great session. Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.
Thank you.